Somewhere in the world tonight, a child is being made into a monster. Not through cruelty they will remember. Not through violence they will be able to name. Not through any single moment they will ever be able to point to and say, "That is when I changed." But through a slow, invisible sculpting. Through 1,000 small experiences that will teach them, at the deepest level of their developing mind, that the world is not a place where love is safe, where honesty is rewarded, or where vulnerability leads to connection. By the time they are 7, the wiring will be nearly complete. By the time they are 12, the personality will be almost fully formed. By the time they are 20, they will be walking through the world with a set of instincts that most people cannot detect, cannot understand, and cannot defend themselves against. They will not remember the making. They will only know the result. They will be charming. They will be strategic. They will be quietly ruthless. They will be everything the world both fears and rewards. By the end of this video, you will understand exactly how this happens. The specific conditions, the specific traumas, the specific dynamics inside families, schools, and neighborhoods that shape a mind into what psychologists now recognize as the Dark Triad. And you will understand something even more important. Because if these personalities are made, not born, then the process of making them can be interrupted. Not always, not easily, not with any single intervention, but often enough that the future does not have to look like the past. Let me begin with a truth that most people find deeply uncomfortable. Dark Triad personalities are not born as villains. They are born as babies. The same way every human being is born, small, helpless, wired for connection, reaching with the entirety of their developing consciousness for the arms of a caregiver who can meet their needs and mirror their emotional world. Every human infant arrives on this planet expecting love, expecting safety, expecting to be seen, held, and understood. And what happens in the first years of life, during the period psychologists call the critical developmental window, determines whether that expectation is confirmed or shattered. This is not sentimentality. This is neuroscience. The human brain is not fully formed at birth. It develops in response to the environment it encounters. The neural pathways that will govern empathy, emotional regulation, attachment, and trust are not hardwired at birth. They are sculpted by early experience. A child who receives consistent, attuned care develops one kind of brain. A child who receives chaotic, neglectful, or hostile care develops a different kind of brain. And a child who receives care from a parent who is themselves personality disordered. A parent who cannot properly attune to the child's emotional world, who uses the child as a source of narcissistic supply, who alternates between smothering and abandonment, develops the specific kind of brain that is now being identified in Dark Triad research. The tragedy is that most Dark Triad personalities did not choose to become what they are. Somewhere in the darkness of their early years, before they had the capacity to consent to anything, their developing minds were reshaped by conditions they could neither escape nor comprehend. This does not excuse what they later do to others. Adult behavior is still a matter of adult choice. But it does explain a great deal. And understanding is the first step toward preventing the next generation from repeating the pattern. Let me show you the specific conditions that produce these personalities. Not one condition, there are several. And they often work in combination, reinforcing each other, creating an environment so difficult to survive that the child develops the specific adaptations we now call the Dark Triad. The first condition is unpredictable love. The most damaging environment for a developing child is not necessarily one of consistent cruelty. Consistent cruelty is terrible, but the child can at least form a coherent understanding of the world. The world is dangerous, adults cannot be trusted, and safety must be found elsewhere. The most damaging environment is one of intermittent affection. The parent who is warm one day and cold the next. The parent who adores the child during their good moods and rages at the same child during their bad moods. The parent whose behavior is not predictable based on anything the child has done. It is driven by internal states the child cannot see or influence. The child in this environment has no way to learn cause and effect. They cannot figure out what pleases the parent because what pleased the parent yesterday enrages the parent today. Their nervous system is placed in a state of constant vigilance. They watch every micro-expression on the parent's face. They memorize every tone shift in the parent's voice. They become hyper-attuned to the emotional weather of the household. This hyper-attunement is the seed of what will later become the Dark Triad personality's extraordinary ability to read other people. They did not develop this skill because they wanted to be good at manipulation. They developed it because their survival, as small children, depended on predicting the unpredictable moods of a person twice their size. By the time they are adults, this skill is second nature. They read everyone effortlessly. They see through social presentations. They map emotional undercurrents that most people cannot even sense. But they no longer use this skill for survival. They use it for advantage. Because somewhere along the way, they learned that reading people was not a way to build connection. It was a way to control outcomes. The second condition is contingent worth. In healthy families, children are loved for who they are, not for what they achieve, not for how they look, not for what they can do for the parent, simply for existing, for being their own strange, particular self, with their own strange, particular preferences and personality. This kind of unconditional love creates a foundation that psychologists call a secure sense of self. The child learns that they are inherently worthy. They can fail without their worth being threatened. They can succeed without their identity depending on the achievement. In the families that produce Dark Triad personalities, this foundation is often missing. Instead, the child is loved conditionally. They are loved when they perform, when they win, when they make the parent look good, when they succeed at whatever the parent has decided is important, when they conform to the image of the ideal child the parent needs them to be. They are not loved for who they are. They are loved for what they represent. This creates a specific developmental catastrophe. The child begins to intuit that their real self, the messy, imperfect, ordinary self that all children have, is not lovable. What is lovable is the performance. So they become the performance. They construct, from the earliest years, a version of themselves that maximizes parental approval. They suppress the messy internal experiences that would disappoint the parent. They cultivate the traits that produce love and hide the traits that produce withdrawal. By the time they are 10, the true self has been buried so deeply that even they cannot access it. There is only the performance, the persona, the mask. This is the origin of what psychologists call the false self, the polished external construction that Dark Triad personalities present to the world and that they themselves often mistake for who they actually are. The tragedy is that beneath the false self, there is still a real self, a frightened, unloved, uncertain child who was never allowed to exist openly. And that child has been carrying a wound for decades, the wound of never having been loved for their actual being. Adult Dark Triad personalities rarely encounter this wound directly. They have built too many defenses, but the wound shapes everything they do. Their constant need for admiration is the child's cry for the unconditional love they never received. Their inability to tolerate criticism is the child's terror of the parental withdrawal that followed any failure to perform. Their contempt for weakness in others is the internalized voice of the parent who taught them that weakness in themselves was unlovable. They are, in a sense, still children, still performing for the parent who is no longer there, still trying to earn a love that was never available. Only now they are performing for the whole world, and the world, unable to see through the performance, gives them the applause they were denied. But applause is not love, and no amount of applause will ever heal what was never healed in childhood. This is why so many Dark Triad personalities, even at the height of their success, describe an underlying emptiness they cannot escape. The applause is not the medicine. The medicine was needed 30 years earlier, and it never came. The third condition is exposure to modeled ruthlessness. Children learn how to be human by watching the humans around them. If they are surrounded by adults who model empathy, cooperation, and honesty, they internalize these as the default patterns of human behavior. If they are surrounded by adults who model manipulation, exploitation, and betrayal, they internalize these instead. Most Dark Triad personalities did not learn manipulation from books. They learned it by watching a parent, a step-parent, an older sibling, or another authority figure use manipulation successfully in their daily lives. They watch the parent lie to their spouse and get away with it. They watch the parent charm strangers while treating family members with contempt. They watch the parent gaslight a sibling into believing something that did not happen. They watch the parent perform sadness when they needed sympathy from an outsider. They watch the parent's cold ability to end friendships when the friendship was no longer useful. And through this observation, they absorbed a specific worldview. They learned that appearances matter more than realities, that warmth is a tool to be deployed strategically, not a state to be inhabited genuinely, that other people are means to ends, not ends in themselves, that trust is a resource to be extracted from others while carefully withheld from them. This is not paranoia, this is education. It is exactly what the child was taught by the models available to them. It was not spelled out in words. It was demonstrated in action, day after day, until the child assumed that this was simply how human beings function. The tragedy is that most of these children, in the earliest years, did not want to become like their models. They wanted love, connection, and safety. But when the environment consistently rewarded the modeled behaviors and punished any deviation from them, when honesty was mocked, when vulnerability was exploited, when trust was betrayed, the child learned that the modeled behaviors were the only path to survival. By the time they had the cognitive capacity to consider alternatives, the alternatives no longer felt available to them. The pattern was set, the instincts were formed. And a child who is never allowed to be soft, in an environment where softness is punished, will grow into an adult who no longer remembers what softness felt like. Now, if you have made it this far, you understand more about the origins of these personalities than most people ever will. But the most important part of this video is coming next. Because I have shown you 3 environmental conditions that shape the Dark Triad personality, now I need to show you something even deeper, something that transforms these environmental conditions into permanent, neurologically embedded patterns. Because environmental influence alone does not fully explain the phenomenon. Many children experience unpredictable love, contingent worth, and exposure to ruthlessness, and do not become Dark Triad personalities. They become anxious, depressed, or avoidant. They become people who struggle with intimacy but do not weaponize it. Something else has to happen for the full Dark Triad personality to emerge. Something specific, something inside the child themselves. Let me show you what it is. The 4th condition, the one that transforms difficult environment into Dark Triad personality, is the survival strategy of preemptive predation. Here is the core insight that recent research has begun to confirm. In an environment where being vulnerable is dangerous, most children respond by becoming avoidant. They withdraw, they hide, they minimize their needs. They try to become invisible. But a smaller subset of children respond differently. They observe the environment, they calculate the dynamics, and they come to a specific conclusion. If the world is going to hurt me anyway, I will hurt it first. If the powerful are going to exploit the weak, I will not be weak. If love cannot be trusted, I will not need love. I will need control. If being seen leads to harm, I will make sure others are seen and I remain hidden. This is not a conscious decision. It is a survival adaptation, and it emerges most often in children who have two specific traits. The first is unusual intelligence, not necessarily genius-level intelligence, but above average intelligence. Enough intelligence to see patterns other children miss, enough to strategize, enough to understand that if the game is rigged, the only path to safety is to master the game. The second is unusually strong will, a refusal to accept helplessness, a refusal to become the victim the environment seems to want them to be. These two traits, intelligence and will, are in themselves beautiful. In a healthy environment, they produce leaders, thinkers, and creators. But in the specific environment I have described, unpredictable love, contingent worth, modeled ruthlessness, they produce something else. They produce a child who decides, at a very young age, that they will never again be in a position where someone else has power over them. They will be the manipulator, never the manipulated. They will be the reader, never the read. They will be the strategist, never the piece on someone else's board. This decision is often made silently, without words, without full awareness. But once it is made, it organizes the entire developing personality around itself. Every skill they later develop, social intelligence, charm, verbal fluency, emotional mimicry, is deployed in the service of this original vow. Never again will I be helpless. Never again will I trust. Never again will I let anyone see the child who was hurt. By the time they are adults, this vow is invisible even to them. They do not experience themselves as damaged people executing a defense strategy. They experience themselves as superior people who have seen through the illusions the rest of the world still believes in. They are proud of what they have become. They mistake their armor for identity. They mistake their manipulation for intelligence. They mistake their inability to trust for wisdom. And underneath all of it, forgotten but never dissolved, is the child who made the vow. The child who could not survive another betrayal. The child who chose predation as the only alternative to being prey. Now let me address something that many of you are feeling right now. You are recognizing yourself in some of these descriptions. Not fully, not in the extreme form the Dark Triad describes, but in fragments, in tendencies, in moments of your own life you had almost forgotten. You may be feeling a strange combination of guilt, confusion, and self-suspicion. Let me speak to you directly. Every human being carries some fragment of these adaptations. Every human being has experienced environments where love felt conditional. Every human being has, at some point, chosen strategy over vulnerability. Recognizing yourself in some of these patterns does not make you a Dark Triad personality. The Dark Triad personality is defined by the systematic organization of these patterns into a coherent, dominant, life-organizing structure. It is defined by the near total loss of access to genuine vulnerability. It is defined by the sustained pattern of using other people as instruments across years and decades. Most people carry fragments. Very few people are consumed by them. But the fact that you can recognize the fragments in yourself is actually a profoundly good sign. Because Dark Triad personalities, in the fullest sense, cannot see themselves clearly. Their defenses do not permit that kind of self-recognition. They cannot look at descriptions of these patterns and say, I do that. I have done that. I want to understand why I did that. The very act of recognizing these patterns in yourself is the act that Dark Triad personalities are structurally unable to perform. If you can see it, you can heal it. If you can name it, you can interrupt it. If you can grieve what you had to become to survive your childhood, you can slowly begin to become something else. The path is not easy. Genuine healing from these adaptations requires deep work, sometimes therapy, sometimes years of it, sometimes profound relationships that model, over time, a different way of being human. sometimes spiritual practices that allow access to the parts of the self that were buried long ago. But the path exists, and every person who walks it, every person who transforms the survival strategy into a conscious choice, who learns to be vulnerable again, who reclaims access to their real self beneath the false one, is a person who breaks the pattern for themselves, for their children, for anyone they touch afterward. The making of a dark triad personality is a tragedy that unfolds silently across generations. The unmaking of one is a triumph that echoes just as far. Let me offer you the final piece of this understanding. The reason I have spent so much of this video on the origins of the dark triad is not to excuse what they do as adults. What they do as adults is destructive. It should be resisted. Their victims deserve protection, validation, and support. But if we understand only the pathology and not the origin, we will never prevent the next generation of dark triad personalities from being created. Every child on this planet is a candidate for either flourishing or damage. The environment they grow up in determines which. If we care about reducing the amount of dark triad behavior in the world, and if we care about protecting the children who might otherwise be sculpted into these patterns, we have to look upstream. We have to think about what we are doing to children. Not the children who are obviously being abused. Those cases receive attention, imperfect as it may be. But the children who are being subtly damaged in the ways I have described. The children of unpredictable parents. The children who are loved only when they perform. The children who are being taught, through watching, that manipulation is normal. These children rarely receive intervention. Their damage is invisible. Their homes appear functional from the outside. Their parents are often respected, employed, and admired members of their communities. But something is happening inside these homes, something that will shape the next generation of workplace tyrants, romantic predators, political manipulators, and institutional destroyers. Every one of them was, once, a child. Every one of them, at some point, made the silent vow. Every one of them could have been reached with the right adult, the right therapist, the right teacher, the right friend of the family during the years when the pattern was still forming. Most of them were not reached. That failure of reach is one of the great, quiet tragedies of human civilization. If you are a parent, an aunt or uncle, a teacher, a coach, a therapist, a religious leader, or simply an adult who occasionally encounters children in your life, you have the opportunity, sometimes, to be that reach. To be the adult who sees the child who is being subtly damaged. To be the adult who offers steady, predictable warmth. To be the adult who validates the child's real self rather than the performance. To be the adult who models a form of human connection different from the one the child is learning at home. You will not always know when you are being that adult. The child will not tell you. The transformation may be invisible. But somewhere, sometimes, one of these interventions works. A child who is on the trajectory toward dark triad adulthood is nudged, imperceptibly, onto a different path. They grow up carrying fragments, but not the fully organized pattern. They become adults who struggle with certain tendencies, but who retain access to their real selves. They become people who can love, be loved, and repair when they hurt others. You may never know that you were the reason, but you were. This is how we reduce, over generations, the amount of dark triad behavior in the world. Not through better detection, not through harsher punishment, not through any grand institutional reform. Through countless small interventions in the lives of countless small children, made by countless adults who understood what was at stake. That is the deepest response to everything I have shown you in this series. The dark triad rises through hierarchies. It destroys relationships. It reshapes institutions. It shapes the arc of history. But it begins as a wounded child, making a silent vow. And every time we reach one of those children before the vow is made, Every time we offer the steady love that says the world does not have to be predatory, that vulnerability can be safe, that the real self is worth loving, we tilt the future by an inch towards something better. An inch is not enough, but an inch multiplied by millions of adults across generations is how civilizations change. Be the inch for a child near you, for a child you may not even know is watching. You will not always see the result, but somewhere, somehow, in a life you will never track, you may have been the one who kept a personality from crystallizing around the wound. That is one of the most meaningful things any human being can do. And you do not need permission from anyone to begin. Let me close with this. We began this video with a difficult truth, that somewhere in the world tonight, a child is being made into a monster. That truth is real, and it will keep being real, no matter how many videos are made, no matter how much awareness spreads, no matter how much progress human civilization makes. But there is another truth. Somewhere in the world tonight, a child is being unmade, rescued, redirected, given the steady, patient, ordinary love that interrupts the vow before it hardens. That work is happening too, quietly, every day, in homes, in classrooms, in therapy rooms, in playgrounds around the world. The making and the unmaking are always in motion, simultaneously, everywhere. The question is not whether the darkness exists. It does. It always will. The question is what balance we tip toward with our lives. Every act of steady love tips the balance one way. Every act of manipulation tips it the other. You cannot control the whole balance, but you can control your part of it. And the sum of everyone's parts is what history becomes. Choose your part carefully. The children of the future are watching, right now, the adults you are becoming. If this video changed the way you understand human origins, hit the like button. It genuinely helps this channel reach the people who need this message most. Subscribe if you want more content that pulls back the curtain on the psychology of power, human development, and civilization itself. And in the comments below, I want to know, do you recognize any of these childhood conditions in your own history? What has been your journey with them? Your honesty could be the reason someone else finds the courage to begin their own healing. In my next video, I'm going to reveal the science of empathy itself, how it develops in the brain, why some people have almost none of it, why some people have too much of it, and what recent research has discovered about whether empathy can be trained, restored, or protected across the lifespan. You do not want to miss it. Until then, stay awake, stay aware. And remember, every child was once innocent. Every adult was once a child. And the world we build for the small ones is the world we will one day have to live in ourselves. Build it with care.